Culturove Galer Ushal, Chief Executive of Dublin City Council, Dublin City Librarian, French Embassy and guests. I'm delighted to welcome you to the winner interview for the 2022 Dublin Literary Award, sponsored by Dublin City Council, here in the sylvan setting of Merrion Square Park at the International Literature Festival Dublin. My name is Anne-Marie Kelly, Director of the Dublin UNESCO City of Literature. And just in case you haven't heard, The Art of Losing by Alice Zeniter, translated from French by Irishman Frank Wynne, and nominated by the Public Library in the Pompidou Centre, Paris, has won this year's Dublin Literary Award. And just to remind us again what this actually means, The Art of Losing, a family saga with themes of migration and identity, published by Picador, was selected from 79 titles by an expert panel of judges, sitting over there, chaired by Professor Chris Morash of Trinity College Dublin. These books were nominated by 94 libraries from 40 countries in the world, and 30 were in translation. The significance of having books in translation expands our reading experience beyond the Anglophone world, and the Dublin Literary Award, sponsored by Dublin City Council, is a matter of pride to us in the city because of its inclusivity. So we will hear from nos gagnants, winners now, in this interview with, aptly enough, Michael Cronin, Professor of French in Trinity College Dublin and Director of the Trinity College Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation. And let us give them all a warm Dublin welcome.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this evening's interview conversation with the winner of the Dublin Literary Prize and the translator of the winning novel. So what I would like to do, at least to begin with, is one of the things that you kind of touched on this morning when you were acknowledging the receipt of the prize and responding to it, was the stories that often don't get told. What happens if you're on the kind of the losing side of a conflict is not only are you perceived to have not won the conflict, but often the stories get lost too. So did you feel in writing The Art of Losing that it was all about the art of finding? You wanted to kind of find or retrieve those stories that have been marginalized, neglected, lost?
Yes, and they were lost for many reasons. One of the reasons, obviously, is the story that I wanted to tell was the story of people who would be like a fiction version of my family. And my grandparents, they couldn't read nor write, so we don't have written archives, documents that can back to understand what happened. And even even if I find newspaper from then that were published in Kabylia, it's something that I know my grandparents could not read. So how do I create and how do I write a story from no written base? So that was one thing, and of course the other reason is that the versions of these families caught in the war and who had to fled has been rewritten on both sides of the Mediterranean Sea. On one side by the new Algerian state, who had one version, which was there is only one hero, and it's the people. So that meant that that everyone was a fighter pro-independence, and if you weren't, then you were, most of the time, nothing. You didn't exist. Or if you were talked about, it was like you were a Shakespeare villain. Like everything you wanted to do in your life was to kill thousands and thousands innocent people and then laugh after. And on the On the French side, it was not really talked about. We didn't even call it a war. In the first time, we didn't even, acknowledge the fact that we colonized a country. So the decolonization was, of course, very complicated to deal with because there was no admission of the colonization in the first place. And when the people that were called the harkis were talked about, most of the time it was by the extreme right wing as a proof that colonization was a good thing, that indigenous people loved France, that there were no forms of oppression at all, and that basically Algeria should have stayed French. So the word that was used to call my grandfather was a word that was putting him in a box. Like the word belonged to my opponent on a political side. So right from the story was first to claim back the words that were used to name my people, but that were used actually against my people, that were used to silence my people.
Frank, I mean, as you know, the Irish translator of the art of losing, were you kind of conscious of in translating Alice Zeniter's text that there were a lot of echoes, parallels with our own experiences in Ireland, where there were people after independence who were deemed to have been on the wrong side, that had the a lot of the controversies around the commemoration of RIC, for example, and people who were in the Royal Irish Constabulary, and how they were deemed to kind of they were seen as traitors, disloyal. So did you find, when you were translating the text that it had maybe another dimension of meaning to you because of these parallels, or some parallels to Irish experience?
I was very conscious because my father was born in 1901, and so my father was during the 1919 Rising, I think, and was there for the Free State and for the Civil War that ensued. I know from, again, like the grandfather in Alice's novel, this is not something he ever talked about, but I do know that during the period of the Black and Tans, he managed to free a number of his friends who had been taken by them. He was obviously around for the Second World War and then for the Republic. And again, I mean, he died when I was 14, so it's not as though not to have had very long conversations about this. It wasn't talked about. And again, the history of Ireland certainly from 1922 on has been one of either silence or recrimination. We have, two major political parties who still exist based on where they were situated in 1922. So from that point of view, but also our version of history, the version of history that I learned growing up, again amassed all people into one. So we had all been in favour. We had always wanted this. We had always done this. And of course, you look at any piece of history in any sort of detail, and you discover, of course, that's not the case. Ali, having fought the French in the Second World War, as many people in both Algeria and Morocco were obliged to do, felt a loyalty to them and thought that they felt a loyalty to him, only to be betrayed by them and also by his fellow countrymen. And when they are forced to flee in 1962 after independence, they are told they will be warmly welcomed as citizens, but they end up in relocation camps, they end up in poor housing, they end up with no support, and then, of course, they end up being demonized by the very people who use harki as we should have kept Algeria, everyone. So yes, the parallels were very clear to me reading it, and I think that Alice has very beautifully captured the entire sweep of it. It's all too often what happens is you get a small part of the story that assumes you know the larger whole. And Alice never for a moment expects that. She tells you the various possible sides of the story.
At least when you were, I mean, you've mentioned your family background and the access that people had to literacy and so on. And were you conscious of the fact that when you were writing this story, this is both the story of your ancestors in Algeria and not the story of your ancestors in Algeria? In other words, was there tension between the freedom that you needed as a writer to imagine a story, and then what's sometimes called the tyranny of fact? Did you feel that tension at all in writing the book?
No, I think my process of writing was quite clear, and it was that I would use every tiny bits of story that I had from my family, and they were not that many, and they were very short, and sometimes they were not really believable either. Like the story of my grandfather becoming rich, because at some point the torrent brings the olive press, and like it was always told in my family, like a sheer fairy tale. And growing up, I was believing this story, but when I started to write it, I was, wait, like the torrent couldn't make actually the press, so it was taken from someone else, and my grandfather never give it back. So it's not a fairy tale, like it's actually more complicated that it sounded. But so I took these tiny bits, and I knew that between these points, I could imagine things to draw the lines of fiction to connect them. And at some point, I started to have like the whole story more or less in place. And a historian friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go with him to the military archive in Aix-en-Provence and see if I could find the military record for my grandfather. And then I said no, because I was writing a work of fiction, and I knew that at this point, if I read something that was going against my story, I would be completely like torn apart. The thing that, so now I know the facts, but the story I want to tell that what I do. So yeah, I said just like I pass, and I'm gonna just keep going with my dots and my lines.
Yeah, as you were saying there about family stories, Vivian Mercier, who was a critic here years ago, once said, the more detail there is in an Irish story, the less likely it is that it's true. People tend to embroider, and this goes very much for family stories as many other stories. Frank, when you were translating Alice's book, were there particular challenges that came up? Because each book, of course, has its own specific character, its own way of working and hanging together. So, were there particular challenges, and did you work with when you were, or did you kind of leave Alice alone while you got on with the translation?
There are specific challenges in any book. The thing with Alice's book is that actually it has multiple narrators at various times. So this is notionally the story of Naïma, and Naïma does have her own voice in the third part of the book. It is the story of Ali and Yema and Hamid and whatever, but that is told to us in a third person. And then there is not an omnipresent author, but an author who occasionally pops in to say, if I were Naïma, I wouldn't have done this. If Naïma, I would have started my story here. I would have, and that's it. This is not attempting to be this sort of grand post-modern novel, but nonetheless, you have this little voice going, who's that? And you need to keep an ear for the multiple voices and to play them against each other. So it begins with, the wonderful pageantry of the beginnings of the first occupying invasion in 1830. And it uses, in French, quite a historic voice, and you recreate that sort of 19th century, history as it is written. I mean, one of the beautiful things that she does is to say that there are histories, plural. When you start folding them all into history, then it is neither true nor believable, because actually it takes all of the identity out of it. And so the multiple histories of Algeria, which were of Kabylia, and then of the north, and also of those who were inspired by Egypt to seek for independence, were all squashed into a single chapter in a single book of French history, where they form a different function. So yes, it was lovely to be able to do, but you need to be very attentive to the various voices. In terms of collaboration, what I tend to do is finish a first draft together all the questions that I have, write and say, look, these are the decisions I've made, these are the things I'm thinking, this is what I think, etc. It's difficult to straightforwardly collaborate because the eventual version in English will be that of the translator. And when you're weighing up a sentence, the heft of a sentence, and whether you think it needs another syllable because it's not quite working right, it's really not fair to ask the author whether this works or that doesn't work. On the other hand, there are lots of places where there is an ambiguity in the text which you cannot replicate, and you need direction as to where you want to go. There are details of things that you can't know without asking. And also simply saying, this is how I've read your book, am I right? Because actually I need to be attempting to recreate the voice that I hear in my head has to be as close to the voice that she could hear when she was writing it as possible. Yes, occasionally you just look for a bit of validation. And that process is ongoing. I mean, it happens again when an editor gets involved and says, are you sure you want to do this? And so one of the editors involved, there's a passing reference to Tolkien to Lord of the Rings in the book. And the editor said, can we get rid of that? And I said, no, you can't get rid of that. I didn't write that. I'm just translating it. Could you ask Alice if we could get rid of that? No, I couldn't. She has written and published a book. You bought the book. Tolkien stays.
So you're saying an editorial henchman was supposed to turn up at Alice's door and have these...
It happens more often than you would think. Sometimes, it's very rare, but sometimes you will get editors who look at a translation as though it were the manuscript for a novel. But the novel already exists. All I can do is do it voice in another language. It is not my job, nor would I dare to start tinkering around with it. That's the novel. It is what you attempt to do as a translator is to bring it to more readers in another language.
One of the things that's very striking in this work, and it's one of the things that makes it so very, very memorable, is the power of these images, their particular scenes. Like when the FLN turns up in Ali's village for the first time, there's a real sense of this is happening before your eyes. And is your experience as a filmmaker, does that have a role to play, or do you think or see writing as a kind of a series of images in your mind? Am I writing when you're reading other writers, or just this?
Yeah. So I think it's the first time that I'm gonna answer this question in English, so I apologize for the poor quality of language. There is something that really annoys me when people say that there is something cinematographic about my writing, because writings used to do that centuries before cinema was invented. It's what we did with words, creating images, framing, actually, choosing the angle through which the reader will enter a scene and then like opening the frame or narrowing it instead, or moving like from a window to another. It's it's a big quality of writing, the fact that we can like direct the look inside a scene, and the FLN apparition in the village. I think what was striking to me when I started reading, articles and books about it, was not at all something that came from the cinema, but from ancient theatre. This idea that to impress the villagers, when they weren't enough warriors, they would, light fires around the village and have a few men walking in front of the fire, so you would see hundreds of shadows. That's an ancient trick. That's the step of a magic show. And I wanted, to build a thing which would have this strength, this visions. That is to me way more powerful than the speech by the lieutenant, even if I worked on it a lot as well, so that it could be something in the same time appealing and scary, threatening, and full of the promises of independence. But what I had in mind was this theater, this very basic theater that is playing such a huge part in this war.
And it's a sense in which, because one of the difficulties, of course, about the region you're describing is it became the prisoner of particular kinds of images. I mean, that whole Orientalist tradition in painting and so on, 19th century presents Algeria and Morocco and Tunisia in a particular way. So was there a sense to kind of use maybe particular kinds of images to do away with others, or to challenge others?
Actually, I use them all. All the images, the Orientalism is a part of my literary culture, because, I'm French. I grew up reading French literature, and it's everywhere, and it's beautiful. I mean, it has a lot of problems, of course, like a way of exoticizing. Large parts of the population and cultures, but it created as well a language that is absolutely vivid and rich, and I don't want to let that apart. Kateb Yassine said, "Le français est un butin de guerre." How do I play that?
Yes. Yes, and putain de guerre, not quite that, but yeah. Yes, I suppose it is the spoils of war. French is effectively created from the spoils of war.
So it's something, like Algeria became an independent country, but we Algerian writers, we want to keep the French language because we won it in the war. So that's what Kateb said, and I was. Orientalism is something that I want to keep as well. I don't want to make myself poorer. So this imagery I used as well. I try to create new images. I try to create full characters that weren't seen as like exotic dancers, basically, in the novel of white French people. But in the same time, I use these things about the perfumes, the colors, and
the scene particularly of Yema before she goes to Alice, where everything is laid in front of her, and you detail all of the things that are being given to give her. What is for makeup, what is for perfume, what is for taste, what is for whatever, and then the sort of riding through the night, across across the mountain and being met, and I actually gloss very slightly in English to explain what it is. So the standard greeting is a series of salvos fired by the menfolk when you arrive. All of that has an exoticism to it, and all of it is, I mean, you're aware that you're doing
Yeah,
it.
but it's a perfect example because actually the list of the trousseau.
Yeah, the trousseau.
I got it from a book written at the end of the 19th century by French colonizers. And there were two of them. I keep forgetting their names, but they were military officers, but they were really into geography and botanics, and both of them spoke Kabyle and Arabic, so they were sent away from their military base to write about the villages and the culture and all, and they wrote this list. What is in the trousseau of a Kabylian woman getting married, and of course it's written with this like how it's so exotic, it's so charming, it's so. But the list itself, it's beautiful, and you can see they are amazed by what they are describing. Like trying to get the shapes and the colors right, writing the names in the 3 different languages. So like French, Arabic, Barbaric, and because the list was so well done, it was actually kept on and on in the following books published about Kabylia in the beginning of the 20th century. Everyone is like, oh, we are going to use the list of these 2 guys. And I was like, well, I want to use the list of these 2 guys as well. So yeah, so this scene is really like I took the whole first material and I tried to write the story of my grandmother's wedding based on a list which comes from a completely different source.
Alice, did you? I mean, because reading Art of Losing and comparing it to earlier books, Que donne au bras and Juste devant l'oubli. I mean, they're very different kinds of books. This is a book that moves on to a very large sketch, large canvas, going across 3 generations. Did you feel any sense of trepidation or fear or anxiety about this very large period that you were going to describe or imagine or talk about? Or did it feel like this was the moment to do this kind of writing?
No, actually, it felt like a kind of I don't know, like a crazy hunger. I mean, so first I thought that it would be a book I would write later. I thought, I don't know, I would be 50 or something, that it would be the book of my maturity. Yeah. And I started writing a few bits here and there, and reading story books at the same time, and sociology books as well, and then suddenly I wanted to incorporate everything in the book. So I wanted to talk about this and this and this, and the book kept growing, but it wasn't scary at all, because it was more like a happy frenzy, because I came from this silent story, and then suddenly I was, okay, if I start telling the story, then I need to tell everything. So this is why, as Frank said, you have these different voices, and then you start with the first colonization in 1830, but then you go to Paris in 2020, and then this is why as well my eye as a novelist is here, because I felt I was really dancing with all these elements around me, and I somehow, I don't know, I felt I needed to put myself in it as the puppet master, to show that I was building a novel from all these different sources and materials, and to say this is not something that I can, or this is not something that Naïma could tell as the granddaughter of this family. This is something that I can do, because I'm in a frenzy of writing, and I'm playing with everything that I can. So yeah.
But also the fullness of the tone, and particularly of the author who occasionally intervenes, softens that. There is no sense in the novel that this is the story. This is a story. This is one. There is a lovely point when Naïma says it is a terrible thing when everything that you know about your country is shorter than the Wikipedia article. And that playfulness of acknowledging what you know and what you don't know, and making it very clear how you're finding out and when you're finding out. It also makes it extraordinarily easier for non-French readers, readers of a translation who have no sense of this, because even if you weren't alive during the Algerian War of Independence, it looms. It is something that everyone will have some idea of. This takes nothing for granted, and so by picking pieces here and there in a sort of magpie-like fashion, it rather wonderfully creates this collage, but also telling you what to do. So there were a couple of points, in the translation where editors said, well, should we gloss this, or should we insert a little thing so that people know what it is? I said, no, Naïma is here, on Wikipedia all the day, trying to find out stuff. They can do it. If she can do it, they can do it. And I think that was important. It liberated me from not having to explicitly spell out that, this is the FN, and this is the, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, but actually they think that it's the, you're no longer trying to fill in historical detail for people who won't know it, because we've already been told. Don't do your research.
One of the things, at least that you kind of touched on this morning, in your speech, was why writing becomes so important at particular moments, and your book comes out in France, La Repère, in 2017. And in the intervening period, a lot of it happened in French politics. We saw what happened in the recent elections. And I mean, do you sense that what you described a bit earlier of kind of restoring complexity to people's lives, getting behind or getting beyond labels, that takes an even greater urgency in particular contexts, whether it was the war in the Ukraine, the rise of strong man politics, the rise of populism and so on.
Yeah, and I think the reason that terrible things can happen in politics is that a part of the population can have no empathy and absolutely no representation, or just bad representation of another part of the population. And it's something that even in our modern days and times, with all these things we tell ourselves about social network and all of that, it's still happening. I mean, there are groups of people who live with absolutely no knowledge of how the next group is living, what do they do, how do they live, and because of that, they can think the worst of the other groups, and they can let some laws being passed as well, thinking like, how, why should I care? It's not me that got. So let's and I think that somehow, even if it's limited, and even if, we know it, like reading is still more or less a bourgeois pratique, like it's not well shared socially, but still I have the hope that reading a novel, reading fiction, it can make you connect with some characters that you will never meet in the real world. It will, it builds bridges between groups that don't know each other, and because of that, they can, make some characters so close to you that if that hear a politician next time saying like, yeah, well, I think like all people should be re-migrate. I don't know how you say that in English, or that they don't deserve social housing, or they don't deserve medical cover, or they don't. Then you will think that it's some people that will be affected by that. People who are not that different from you. People you felt empathy for while you were reading a book. And yeah, somehow I keep hoping that it helps.
Frank, I mean, do you see, I mean, the role of translation in development, that kind of empathetic imagination? I mean, in your anthology, Found in Translation, you talked about translation as kind of the beating heart of world literature. But is it also a kind of a beating heart with a kind of an ethical dimension to it? I mean, that
It is an ethical dimension. There is an ethical dimension to it, but I get worried when people start thinking of literature in translation as like cod oil. You know, you take it because it's good for you, but you're not expecting to enjoy it. But yes, of course, there's a part of that. What you've just said and what Alice has just said. Strongman politics and nationalism are fueled by simple stories. You take out all the complexity, you take out all of the backstory, you reduce people to archetypes or to stereotypes, and then it's easy to pit us against them and them against, and us together against someone else. The moment you have complex characters, the moment you get to know people, you realize that actually it's all a little bit more complicated than that the humanity there is more than that. One of the things that does worry me occasionally about translation is that, particularly in the Anglophone world, what we want, what certain publishers want and some readers want, is they wanted to explain the world for them. So, you're a writer from Spain, I'd need you to write about the Civil War. I wasn't alive, well, just write about it anyway. Oh, you're from Rwanda, could you do something about the genocide? And you get this sort of thing where what we're really asking is for someone, could you just condense your entire culture into a charming little novel? And that is not what literature is for either. It's for whatever stories authors choose to tell. But you will get, there's a wonderful author called Patricio Pron, who I've tried to have published in the United Kingdom, and people say, well, Patricio Pron is writing in Spanish, but he's writing about Germany. But he lives in Germany. He's lived in Germany for like 30 years. Why wouldn't he be writing about Germany? Yeah, but I mean, it's really difficult to sell that. But somehow it's difficult to sell David Peace writing about Tokyo or, people's imaginations should be free. But yes, translation, more than anything, introduces us to the minds of other people, rather than the picture postcard, this is what it looks like, or this is the harrowing, story they have to tell, or this is the uplifting story they have to tell. All human beings are more complex than that. And I think what translation does, and what literature and translation does, both going from English into other languages and vice versa, is it says it's who we are as writers, as people, as characters. These are the people we've imagined. We're all kind of alike.
Yeah, I mean, there was a report recently by the British Council on why certain kinds of literatures get translated and others don't. And one of the things that of the translators from Turkish, from Hebrew and Arabic were complaining about is that people were treating literature as a branch of political science or sociology. Yep. It's basically to kind of explain, these. At least, do you get that sense sometimes that you've been boxed into a corner, that people expect you to speak about particular things and to become a kind of a porte-parole or a spokesperson for things in particular ways?
Yeah. All the time. Yeah. All the time. I mean, obviously with the Art of Losing, I felt it a great deal. Like I was writing a piece recently, and I read the articles and the reviews that got published when the book went out in 2017, and I'm praised for actually doing a social work. So you know, so for putting a subject back in the public discussion, for you know, this formula that is used all the time, like giving dignity back to the people, blah 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 blah. It's for, I don't know, like 9 novels out of 10. It's ridiculous. I think everyone should have dignity back now, because apparently
Save you the problem of having to do it.
and so yeah, it's something that I wanted to do as well, of course, with the novel, but it seems to be like the biggest thing that it's talked about, and it's educational work, and yeah, and I've realized, reading interviews, that during the publication, I talked more about Algeria, a country in which I spent 3 weeks in my life, that I've been talking about literature, about this book, literature, which is something I dedicated 20 years of my life to. So yeah, it's a weird thing. And then, of course, for following years, I was really anxious that I would be trapped in this subject, that people would want me to talk about Algeria on and on and on and on. And to me, it's what's part of my story. There is 1,000 stories that I wanna tell, and I don't want to be caught in the nostalgia talking about earlier. So it's tricky.
Yes, something is there. We have described it as a conversation, and of course, it's not just a conversation between the three of us. We want to have everyone else involved in the conversation. So, if anyone has a question or a comment for, I think there's a gentleman at the back there. Yeah. Do we have a microphone? The only thing I'd ask you to ask questions relatively short, if you could, just get everybody a chance to take part.
Thank you, and well done, Alice, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And to you, Frank. My question really is about authorship. And spoken about your role, Frank, and yes, you've kind of said, look, it's Alice's work. However, you've also said, and quite rightly, that the audience are going to be hearing your voice, and it's an area of interest lately about how many people are involved in the work, and that work is a great example of that. So, is it Alice's work? Is it your work to some extent? Are we hearing the voices of 2 French military officers from years and years ago? Are your editors involved? Is the publisher involved? And that sort of group authorship idea, it's very interesting as you've been talking about this. I wonder what you both think about that.
Well, Alice, in her acceptance speech earlier, thanked her editors and those people who had read this at a formative stage, and they will have played a role in what they did. The collaborative role between us is another one. My role with my editors, there were 3 editors and a copy editor, all have influenced the English version. There are also versions in Hungarian, in German, in Italian, in Spanish, all of which are different, but all of which are, to some extent, performing Alice's texts in their language. One of the things that occasionally is brought up about translation in particular is people will say, oh, well, you know, many people could translate this book, but only one person could have written it. And this is absolutely true. But each and every translator would have given you a different book at the end of it. They have no choice. The fact that many people can play Bach's Goldberg variations does not mean you want to come to my house and listen to me try. And there is a huge difference between what Rosalind Turek does, or what Glenn does, or what Murray does, or what Keith Jarrett does. So, in a sense, what the English translation, the book that has been received the award today, it is my book, absolutely, but it is also Alice's book, absolutely, and there have been a whole bunch of other people who have been involved, some directly involved in this text, and others more directly in terms of how I came to be a translator and the sort of translator that I am, and also kind of everything I've ever read ever, and then everything she's ever read ever. It's all very complicated.
Yeah, for me, the book, even before Frank's translation, it's made of braids of languages, and clearly not all of them are mine. Like far from that. For example, I've been reading a lot the works of Abdelmalek Sayad, who is a sociologue. He was a close friend of Bourdieu. And Sayad wrote a book about Algerian immigration in France, which is called La Double Absence, so double absence. And he chose to translate his interviews with the people he worked with in a kind of a literal translation, so keeping the grammar or the expressions from Arabic and from Kabyle, and so it gives a really weird language, a language that I had not read before, and reading his books, I was thinking, oh, that's fascinating, and I want to use some of these tricks. So I'm kind of using Sayed's voice, using the people he's interviewing. So that's already probably 50 different people that I incorporate within the book, and then it keeps going. So, like for example, the Naïma's roommate in the novel, she's based a real friend of mine, Sol, who is a war reporter, and use some of her expressions, way of talking, and when I told Sol that I got this prize today, she was like, "Oh, I won a prize!" Yeah, I understand why she says that. Like that's her book as well. Somehow she's in it. Her voice is in it. So, yeah, we are several voices, but I am the puppet master, as I said. So it's not. One of the one I wanted to add is that sometimes, like right now, I'm just quoting voice I can think of, and they were more or less a conscious part of my work. But in 2018, I went to this class in a university in Lyon, and the students, they were PhD students in literature, and they had worked on my book, and a couple of them did talk about the Orientalism in my book, and they picked 3 sentences that were from an opera on Samson and Delilah, and they are exact quotes. I have never heard this opera. I have never read the libretto, but I know that I didn't. Then it's not possible that I completely invent these sentences, and they are exactly the same. So they reached me. I don't know how, and they slept in a corner of my memory. But I wanted to write about dawn and the end of the end of a great feast and the sunrise behind the mountain. These sentences came back. And they're not my voice. They're one of the 1,000 voices that I have in my head when I write.
I just at least that you've banked that check because see all these rushing towards the Crédit Lyonnais looking for their tuppence worth in the front.
How deliberate is the Elizabeth Bishop echo in the title?
The entire Elizabeth Bishop poem is towards the end. It's very, very deliberate. In fact, all but the last quatrain of the Elizabeth Bishop appears shortly before the end, And it is very much because what Ali's we're talking about is about language and loss and a sense of homeland and loss. So it's, and again, it's one of the rather beautifully playful things in that it's it to her by a young Algerian man as to Naïma as he's her back to the airport.
Could you say a little about how the book has been received in Algeria?
Not really, really. Not really, because there was a few reviews, but they are not, you know, like I don't know. They have nothing much to talk about, and the thing is that it wasn't republished in Algeria like some French books are, which allows them to be cheaper. My book has been sold in Algeria as a French book. That makes it really expensive, and that means that the people who bought it, they're like the educated elite already, and they're most likely to know already what I'm talking about. I didn't get the chance to reach a bigger readership.
There's a gentleman back there, yeah. Could you take the microphone? Yeah, so everybody can hear you. Great, great.
So I'd like to congratulate you on the prize.
Thank you.
It's a big pleasure to be listening to you. Very inspirational for, I mean, young people trying to be writers someday. You know, I know that it's somehow something between a fiction and the stories that you listen to from your family and everything. And I know that it's really like you don't want to be caught into the you know, trying to be really deep into the historical things. But I reckon if it has some kind of a documental side to the story, or how did you approach the entire war history, or the place itself, the places that that the story happens in, and everything. I reckon that if you like you're sewing the story between the different stories you had from your family, you often go through the historical facts that happened, and then, you know, so this took place in this time, and then so maybe my grandmother could be there, you know, and see that thing happening. So how did you? What was the process around that?
Well, it's a bit what you described. I had all these historical documents and books, and sometimes like, you know, like a very short film clips about demonstrations or this kind of things, and I try to have my actors make their way through that, and I was wondering, like, you know, like how would they have seen that, or could they have heard about this thing, or I hope like you're not going to take the prize back after hearing that, but at some point I think like I pushed it in a kind of too clumsy way. Like I really wanted to talk about the attack at the milk bar in Algiers. And I knew that my grandfather, at some point, he bought a small flat in Algiers, so he probably would have gone, you know, back and forth between the mountain and the capital. So that was not completely, you know, out of the blue to put him there. But still, I kind of felt I kind of felt bad because I could see that it was really like a trick from a writer being like, yeah, so he goes to Algiers and oh yeah, it's going to be right on the day that there is the attack, and that's after that you will have the Battle of Algiers, and the city becomes this war zone, that's not very elegant. I hope that the rest put my characters, in subtle ways through some events that they could have witnessed.
Well, you had great precedents, because Pontecorvo, when he was filming the
Yeah.
Algiers, did exactly the same. It's like, you people come over there and pretend to die. I'm sorry, we've been through a devastating siege and war here, but nonetheless, there is a realism to what he's attempting to do, which is extraordinarily beautiful and communicated, certainly in France at the time, what the Battle of Algiers was like. But again, he was weaving a form of fiction through history in order to tell a greater truth. One of the great things that fiction does is uses lies to tell truth.
I can just take one more question, because here, yeah, front. Just wait for the lady here in the second row. Yeah, yeah. Okay, right. Well, we'll try.
It's a very quick question. I just wanted to know, forgive me if you don't want to answer, how your family felt about, your extended family felt about being autofictioned in this way. It's the obvious.
Sorry. I don't know. I mean, like my family is. So first, my family is a big family. There are different people. Not everyone is taking the thing in the way. They're okay, more or less. Some of them are really proud. Some of them feel a bit uncomfortable. But what I love is the fact that my grandmother, so because we cannot read the book, she actually has a fiction of what the fiction is, because some of my uncles and aunts they told bits, and then she's inventing the book in her head. And she seems to be really happy with the fiction of my fiction she has. So it's for the best.
That sounds like a great answer to this here in the front row. I wish.
Thank you. My question was for Frank in relation to the translation. I need to understand this. So, you both are the winners of the award. But you are saying, I just quoting you. This is from the RT saying that. Obviously, the fact that this is a translation into English makes this possible as well as be considered as a winner. I just need to understand. So the novel was written in French and you translated into English, and you both are co-winners of the award.
Yes.
And then you say as well that you are really thankful to the Dublin Literature Award, because to this you can continue with your translation. So my question was to do more with funding, and how are you kind of, I suppose, able to continue with this work? Is just thanks to this type of awards, or is there any other grants for translators? Or
There are.
Thank you.
The way you survive as a translator is you translate about 5 books a year, because otherwise you starve. Translators are paid. I started doing this 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago. I am still paid what more or less the other translator translating from any language into English is paid. There are grants. They are generally given to publishers to facilitate the publication of a translation. There are residencies which will fund you go somewhere while you're working on a translation. Those can be hugely helpful. There are a number of prizes that you can win. 2 of which this are sufficiently considerable that I could go home now and not bother translating the other 3 books that I'm supposed to be doing this year. But broadly speaking, it is the passion of translators taking books to publishers, publishers or editors deciding to publish them, and deciding to risk their money doing it. But they do precisely that every day when they buy a novel, you know, written in English, or a French publisher buying a novel written in, you know, they look at the novel, they think, okay, yes, I think this is a wonderful novel. I think I can bring this novel to readers, and in that way, that will pay it back. Thankfully, they do not get a share of any of my prize money. But then again, they've never given me a share of any of their grant money.
So I think on that note, then we'll end our conversation this evening. But I think on behalf of everybody here, I would sincerely like to thank Alice Zeniter and Frank Wynne for a fascinating insight into the creative and recreative process, and you get some idea of why both of them are such worthy winners of this prize. And from both Alice and Frank, we look forward to further works, and to thank you all as well for coming along here this evening. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thank you.